Welcome to the NABS podcast. NABS is the support organisation for those working in advertising, marketing and media. I'm your host, Louise Scody. Each week I'll be chatting with someone from our industry to find out how they support themselves and those around them through challenging times as well as the day-to-day. And it's all to help you support your own mental wellness. I can't wait to start chatting. Melissa Robertson is CEO of the creative agency Dark Horses. A vocal supporter of gender equality, Melissa has worked across most sectors, launching brands and consulting on some of the UK's biggest businesses. Melissa is a huge advocate for those going through the menopause, notably instigating an open source menopause policy at Dark Horses that's made waves across our industry. Melissa, welcome. It's absolutely brilliant to have you on. I still remember reading the story about the open source policy and campaign a while ago and being really struck by how revolutionary yet how necessary it was. And I also commented about it on LinkedIn as well, which I may remind you of my comment as we go on. So thank you for joining us and big up the menopause. It's going to happen to a lot of us. How's your menopause going?
Oh my God, it's ceaselessly relentless, I would say. It's so weird. I sort of talk to, as you can imagine, I end up talking to quite a lot of people about menopause on a relatively regular basis. And, I can be talking to really high-powered women and will end up just going, fuck, I just feel so anxious. Do you feel anxious? And everyone will be going, yeah, like it's across my chest. And they're not sort of emotions or feelings you've experienced in the past. We've all been I've been working for nearly 30 years, and it really, yes, of course there are stressed periods, but I'd never sort of felt that side of things. And then suddenly it hits you, and it's just quite extraordinary. But, there's a multitude of symptoms, and they're often changing. But my one symptom that has not changed throughout is I get word holes. So if I do go off on a tangent or forget really a basic word, I think I've developed a slight different pattern of speech to be able to find myself the time to find the words. But sometimes I'll just go, I can't find it.
So I think that is going to be frustrating for anyone, but even more so if you are in the comms industry and you've always prided yourself as someone who's been able to communicate. To find yourself in a situation where you're struggling for words is uncharted territory, isn't it?
It's just it's such a weird feeling. And what's so debilitating about it is that they tend to be really regularly used words that you use, in everyday meetings. And you just can't find them. And you might have even used it 5 minutes ago, or someone might have reminded you for it, and it'll go again. And it's often certain letters of the alphabet are particularly problematic. But then suddenly I'll remember that word, and I'll have a new one that I can't remember. And it's so odd. And I think when it very first started happening, I felt terrified because I felt that I looked completely incompetent, and how can people sort of trust somebody that's supposed to be looking after them, whether that's a client or one of the gang at Dark Horses, if I can't actually speak.
But this is why we need to keep talking about the menopause and all the symptoms so that everyone understands, so that you're not just painted as some lunatic, but actually you're going through actual changes, and yes, this is what they look like.
Yes.
Thinking about the menopause and just broadly throughout life, what does mental wellness look like to you?
That's such a good question. And I've sort of thought about it a lot. I mean, ideally, it would be not experiencing sort of anxiety or depression or mood swings. But I think if you are having one of those difficult days, it's having strong coping mechanics or processes to follow, or knowing that you've got people there who can and will support you. So there's a bit of a security blanket. And for me, it's as simple as that. So
let's take an example. How would you know, let's say on a Tuesday afternoon, your mental wellness has dipped? What's happened and how are you accessing that security blanket?
It depends where I am. If I'm at home, if I'm working from home. My husband's an artist, so he's here. He's very aware of the ups and downs. And sometimes you just need validation and empathy, and that's enough. So I'll say, I'm just having a really bad day or a really bad afternoon, and I'm not sure I can cope. And I can perhaps be a little bit more candid with him. Perhaps saying in the agency, not sure I can cope is perhaps taking it a little bit too far. They might actually freak out. But I can say to my partners at work, yeah, I'm having a bit of a difficult day. And they just know. And then they'll probably step up a bit more in meetings, be a bit more vocal.
So you are absolutely brilliant on menopause support work. And as I mentioned before, Dark Horses is really leading the way on this with the open source policy. And it's really kind of broad, inclusive approach on this, speaking to the whole industry about it, welcoming opinions, and really leading the conversation. So talk to us about how this policy came to being and how it's supporting the menopause community.
It's sort of, I never set out and it wasn't a plan. I just was clearly struggling from the symptoms, realised that I wouldn't be able to cope unless I sort of brought people into it at work. And when I explained, what I was struggling with and saying things like, you can just jump in and help me with a word. That won't be mansplaining. Actually, I want and need it. And it was amazing. I think it was such a sort of warm and safe environment, and people were absolutely brilliant. And actually, they made me feel so much better, so much more confident. Because obviously, if you're feeling anxious, it can just exacerbate all the symptoms. So they made me feel so much better. And that's when I thought, well, perhaps I should write about it, because it's been such a support, and perhaps other people should know that kind of thing is incredibly helpful if you start talking. So I started writing about it in the, just the industry press. And I was astounded by the reaction it got. Loads of people writing in saying how brilliant it was to have somebody sort of publicly talking about it. And then I was asked to write a comment on a piece about menopause policies. And we didn't have a menopause policy. And so before commenting, I was thinking, well, should we have a menopause policy? But actually, maybe we shouldn't have a menopause policy, because, we're only an agency of like 42 people, and I'm definitely the only person who's menopausal, and anybody else is like miles away, years away from being menopausal. So would I just be writing a menopause policy for myself? And isn't that a bit weird? And, like, I'm the CEO. Why would that's suddenly, oh no, that's all wrong. And I sort of went in this sort of circular debate with myself until finally I had a road to Damascus moment when I just thought, well, hang on a second. It's not just about the woman going through menopause. It's about everybody else being able to support and understand. And actually, I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't have that. So, that very long explanation gets me to, right, okay, I've got to write a menopause policy. And I've always been quite fascinated about the biology of why things happen. And I found it online, just trying to understand more about menopause. Everything's incredibly opaque, in very medical language, really inaccessible. So it just took me ages, because I wanted to make it good and coherent and, perhaps even a little bit entertaining. And so it took me, I don't know, about 3 months to write it. And by the time I'd finished writing it, I thought, oh, well, maybe no one else has got menopause policies because they haven't got the time to commit to writing something that's actually helpful and interesting. And that's when I thought, well, I should just make this open source, because then hopefully more people will just take it, and they can take it and they can better it and they can adapt it. And it just seemed like a logical conclusion.
Do you know how many other businesses are adopting it, or how many downloads you've had?
To be honest, it's mostly anecdotal, because you can just you don't have to download it. You can just take it and take it from the site and not actually have to physically download it. And to be honest, we haven't tracked it, but I've spoken to a lot of agencies who say that they've used all or part of it. And I know that there are clients who've asked me to send it to them, and they've said that they've taken it and used loads of it. So Yeah, I think anecdotally, it's probably, if not been used in its entirety, it's helped inform quite a lot of policies out there.
We will put a link to the policy in the show notes. Do have a read. It is extremely helpful. Was there anything that you didn't pop on it that you had any feedback about afterwards that you've then gone on to include where you thought, oh, actually, that's a really good point that we hadn't thought of?
I have not no. I've slightly changed some of the reference materials and book recommendations because new books have come out. I guess the thing that I'm coming to realise is perhaps missing a little bit is early menopause, women experiencing menopause ahead of time, and there isn't a coherent section on that. And I perhaps don't know or understand quite as much about that. But I've been increasingly talking to people and feel that it's probably something that would enhance it. So something that I need
Yeah,
to look into.
yeah, that's right. I've read a few features about women who have started their menopause journey much earlier, whether that's through illness or just because that's how fates hit them. And,
Mm.
they have added challenges to deal with on top of the usual. And I guess it's the same for trans and non binary people as well. They have all the usual menopause symptoms plus everything else that they have to deal with too.
Yes, I mean, again, I haven't. I've referred to the trans and non-binary community, in names, sort of acknowledging that it's not always somebody who presents necessarily as a woman. But I haven't gone into sort of detail about how that might be different for different cohorts.
And I guess one of the things about the policy, it's a springboard. So
Mm.
you've got a lot of information in your policy, and it will signpost to perhaps other people within the menopausal community who need additional support. So your awareness has been raised, and then you can go off and do some research because there's lots of information on the internet. I found Instagram is very good. There are lots of menopausy people talking about the menopause, whether it's exercise, mental health, fitness, all the aspects, which has been really great to see. So you've got all of this talk and you've got the policies. How can organizations put them into practice to give good support?
I think that's the key question, because I think there's lots of talking the talk, and there's a sense that I've spoken to people who've gone, great, it's all out there, job done, bam bam, let's sort of move on to the next thing. And whilst I think it's obviously brilliant to be having far more public conversations about not just menopause, the gender pay gap, women's health, the balance of domestic labour, flexibility, trust, all of these things are really important to drive change. But it's so important that talk is not enough. Even just having a policy isn't enough. It's a bit like with a maternity policy. You only look at it as and when you need it. But in this instance, we want and need everybody to understand, because we're always going to have a partner, a client, a colleague, an aunt, or yourself, somebody that's going through it, that we will come in touch with in our everyday lives. So I worry when people think that it's done now. I think it's one of those things that if you become aware of it being talked about, because you then become aware of it being, that sort of frequency bias, you think, oh, well, that's it, it's sorted. But there's so much that still needs to be done, and organizations mustn't shy away from actually kind of activating the training, making sure managers really know and understand and implement it, and talk about it more. I think you can't talk about it enough.
Absolutely. So, what would be an example of something practical that we could do this week to help support a teammate or a direct report who's perimenopausal?
Well, I think there are lots of ways. I mean, first of all, read our policy or read a good policy, or go and buy a book about it. Go and watch Davina's brilliant documentaries. There are, other great programs out there as well. You can have fun and, watch. There are, comedy programs and things like that. just get more informed, and then you just become more attuned to it. So, I mean, I've talked to sort of young people in the office who have gone home at the weekends and watched Davina's programs with their mums.
Oh, that's great.
Talk to your mum about it, because so many people in our industry are in their 20s, right? So they've probably got a mum that's going through it, but they've never talked to them about it. So find sort of a a more approachable person, someone that you're close to, that you don't feel embarrassed talking about it, because it shouldn't be embarrassing. And I try to make sure when I talk to people, and actually I'm amazed at they're not embarrassed, because it shouldn't be. It's just biology.
Yeah, absolutely. My attitude towards discussing the menopause is the same as my attitude towards discussing periods.
Totally.
It's a thing that happens to you, and everybody needs to know about it. And if you're going to know about one thing, then you also need to know about the other. There's two sides of the same coin.
I think that's
two
exactly
sides of the
right.
same uterus.
Yeah.
And also, people make jokes about death fans and stuff like that. Oh, death fans are important, but it's much more than that, isn't it? Because there are so many symptoms from the menopause.
I think, and they're very diverse and different, and you don't always expect them. So, I another thing I get is like really numb fingers. Suddenly I'll realize I'm actually can't pick things up, and it'll come from nowhere. And it's not just a cold related thing. It's another sort of hormone related thing that happens. Really itchy skin. I always say, if you see a sort of woman of a certain age sort of itching somewhere like here, you absolutely know it's menopause. And it's just because you've lost.
I had an itchy foot last night and I couldn't sleep.
It's in certain places where there's sort of perhaps less fat. So foot, classic. And it's because you've got estrogen leads to, having less estrogen leads to a drop in collagen. So you just don't have as much sort of moisture in your skin. And that's why you get more itchy.
Wow. Well, that's my itchy foot mystery solved. I must take more collagen. How's our industry doing generally on gender equality? Because the overall issue is one that you're really passionate about. And as we're looking forward to the end of this year and the start of a new year, what changes would you like to see happen? Have you got, a number one or two on your gender equality wish list for the industry?
I mean, I suppose it just goes back to the job is nowhere near done. And, you get all of these, you hear these conversations about, well, this has the pendulum swung too far the other way. And the answer to that is no, it has not. I was at a conference last week, and there was this statistic that, we still live in a world where only 1% of investment is in female-led businesses. And by the way, that's down. It's gone down from 3%. So this is not, and I worry so much about all of the conversations around, working from home, or, using, making sure that people are in the office and bums on seats. It's so bad for the women that take responsibility, because it's such a sort of staggering lack of trust. But I think there's a visibility problem. I heard a debate the other day where, some senior women were saying, well, we have to have, if we want to have a seat at the table, we have to be physically visible. And I really rail against that argument, because not that they're wrong. I think the irony is they're not wrong. What pisses me off the most is that it's a behavior that is started by men, has been sort of men's approach to the world for the last however many hundreds and however many years, right? And so we're being forced to behave within those norms, not create new norms or accept new norms. The pandemic created a whole new way of working. It was shitty for all kinds of reasons, but it demonstrated that great work can be done remotely, and that we aren't always reliant on physically being there. And that's not to say that physical meetings aren't nice and, often good, but it shouldn't be the only way to do business.
Oh, I so agree with all of that. What's happening at Dark Horses then with return to the office? How are you negotiating that?
it's slightly different for us because we're an agency that, is really into sport and fitness and wellness. So we've got people that, are regularly training or playing for clubs or training for, half Ironman or, doing boxing or, various other bits and pieces. And sometimes that sort of, requires them to be nearer to where those things take place. So we have a trust model where, we will occasionally, if we've got a pitch or something, ask people to come in. And on the whole, people actually quite enjoy coming in, but we don't say you have to be in on certain days. We just say, come in and do what works for you and we'll trust you to do it. And of course, if we don't feel that people are delivering, we'll probably have a little bit of a word with them. But I'm a very strong believer in the fact that if you've got a skiver, whether they're remote or in the office. You can do absolutely bollocks all in an office.
Absolutely, and many people have through the ages. So if you're going to work for Dark Horses, remember presenteeism is out and CrossFit is in. So what's your well-being passion then? How do you keep yourself fit and active and topped up?
You heard about the dog earlier.
Yeah.
So have a dog. She loves a walk. So if I'm working from home, I'll always do a 5K hours walk with my husband in the morning with her before work. If I'm going into the office, I cycle, and I've always cycled. So that's a sort of 10K each way, and I love it. And I love both. I love walking and I love cycling. I can't really do other stuff. I used to be really sporty, but that's resulted in totally screwed up knees and lots of operations. So sadly, I can't. I'm sort of slightly limited as to what I'm able to do. I can't do running or stuff like that. I think maybe at some
No,
point, I'm sort of thinking when I grow up, maybe I need to do some yoga.
I was just going to say, you need yoga and stretching.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a sort of for me, it's a psychology thing. I've always been able to think of, isn't it great? I'm dual tasking. I'm going into the office and getting my exercise. I'm walking the dog and I'm getting my exercise. Whereas for something like yoga, that you have to carve out time for. And it's just a bit of a psychological issue, one that I need to get over. But also I'm a bit scared of being really shit at it.
Well, I think that's the point, is that you start off rubbish at it and you might end up rubbish at it, but there's lots of benefits on the way.
Yeah.
Well, that's my yoga sales pitch. There was something I was going to ask you before, which may be very obvious to some people and not to others. Why is the menopause a mental wellness issue?
Well, I mean, you could ask the government, but they won't.
You could ask the government a lot of things, yes.
There are so many mental health related symptoms in the menopause, and it's anything from the we started talking about anxiety, depression, mood swings, self-esteem. These are all sort of huge mental health issues, but also just feeling unwell all the time, tired, itchy, irrational, all of these things are, but I think there are very specific sort of, mental health symptoms that come to the fore for almost all women going through it. And part of the problem in our country is that not enough GPs are trained up in menopause. Something like 42% of universities don't even cover it in medical degrees. So you've got all of those GPs out there and who don't always diagnose it. So women will be going and saying, I'm having some really, terrible mood swings, or I'm suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever, and they'll be put on medication. And that
Yeah.
medication is not medication that's right for women going through menopause, and it can be genuinely detrimental. So I realize that's not entirely answering your question. It's going off on another tangent, but I think that sort of awareness and understanding, again, is just really important. People need to know. And when I say people, I mean medical professionals too.
Yes, absolutely they do. There are lots of challenges there. How does the Adlands community lift you up?
Um, do you know what? It can be really tough, what we do, because, we are ultimately having to be people pleasers. And certainly in my role, you're sort of often, caught between a rock and a hard place. But I just, what we do is really fun, right? It's not life or death. And you work with really bright people who are interested in all kinds of things and can get interested in things that on the surface you wouldn't even imagine is particularly interesting, but yet you can find sort of hooks. And so what we do, I think, lifts me because it's joyful, right? We're the fun part of our client's day. And then, I have, I'm in the privileged position of being able to, speak to lots of women across the industry on a regular basis, whether it's through menopause conversations or WACL or things like that. And just the power of support, it's genuinely lifting. People are great. People, when they're great, are really, really great and so good at lifting up people. And I don't mean just women. I mean, guys at work, my partners, they're there and they do lift you, and hopefully I lift them, and you have a bit of a laugh. But I think it's a great industry to be in, and we should enjoy it. It's supposed to be fun.
Absolutely, it's a big draw for people coming into the industry because it's not super serious. It is something where you can be creative and fun and work with interesting people. Finally, what's a lesson that you've learned about how to support yourself?
That's such a soul searching question, isn't it?
I like to be soul searching or idiotic. It could go either way.
For me, I think it's just about age and maturity to an extent, just being comfortable with who you are, not worrying about what other people think too much, knowing that you can have a laugh. But I think probably the biggest actual sort of practical lesson is teaching myself to rest when I can't sleep. As simple as that, to sort of go into a meditative state, and even if it feels if you've been awake for 6 hours in the night, you've still rested and can survive the next day. It's been a very great skill, and I've learned it about 20 years ago, and I use it regularly.
That's sage advice, and next time I find myself awake with an itchy foot, I shall think, well, I'll just have a rest. Like Melissa said, it's worked for her, it'll work for me. Thank you so much for talking to us today, and thank you for all of your really industry-leading work on the menopause. You really have shone a light on the issue and continue to do so. So thank you so much. As I said before, we will pop a link to the open source policy in the show notes, and also a link to Melissa's LinkedIn page as well, so that you can find out more about her. In the meantime, thank you so much, Melissa. It's been an absolute joy talking to you.
Thanks, Louise. Lovely to chat.
Thank you.